Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to board members and the executive team who are joining us today for this online meeting of the FSA Business Committee. Welcome to all of those members of the public and our stakeholders who I know are joining us online for this meeting. As you'll all be well aware, we were originally going to be meeting in person in Belfast last week. However, with the passing of Queen Elizabeth, we postponed the meeting until today. Given that we're meeting online, we have introduced a few additional breaks to avoid screen fatigue and give us all a chance to stand up and stretch our legs. So that does mean that the meeting will extend a little bit longer than is usual. I want to just start by welcoming two of our new board members, Hayley Campbell-Gibbons and Anthony Harbinson, who are joining us for the first time today. Anthony is also our board member for Northern Ireland and will be the chair of the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee. Both were appointed on the 1st of September for 3 years. Our other board member, new board member, Justin Varney, has a similar term of appointment. Justin sends his apologies today. He had a prior commitment which predates his appointment to the board, but we very much look forward to welcoming him to the table in December. And he's obviously been copied into all of the documents relating to this meeting. It's also a particular pleasure to welcome Judith Hanvey, who is our boardroom apprentice. I think that's an official title, but essentially will be participating as a full board member would. Judith is part of a scheme which has been running in Northern Ireland, which is about to be widened to the rest of the UK. And this is the first time the FSA has been part of this scheme, although it's been running in Northern Ireland for some time. We're absolutely delighted to have Judith with us. Welcome. Given that the date of this meeting was changed at rather short notice, we do have rather more apologies than we're used to. We have incredibly committed board members, so it's very rare, in fact, to have apologies either from the board or indeed from the senior members of the executive team, but there are a few today that I just want to record. In particular from Ruth Hussey, who's our deputy chair and board member, and of course, from Timothy Riley, who's a board member and also chair of the ARAC committee. Both of them will be joining us for the main board meeting, which will take place on Monday morning. Apologies also from Anjali Janeja, who's our Director of International and UK Affairs, and from Julie Pearce, our Director of Openness Data, Digital, Wales, Science, Evidence and Research. That must be the longest job description in the agency, I think. And in addition, Rick Mumford, who's the Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor, also sends his apologies today. In fact, when it comes to matters in Julie's area, I think Diane Barlow is going to represent Julie, who's Diane's our Chief Information Officer. So welcome, Diane. I really do recognise that the late change of dates made it difficult for some people to attend, and I'm very grateful to people who are here, some of whom I know have had to rearrange other commitments. Before we get started on the main proceedings of the day, I want to ask board members whether they have any new external interests to declare. Even if these are interests which might have arisen since our last board meeting. I hope they've been recorded with the Secretariat in writing, but if anybody has any public declaration to make, this is the moment to do that. No, not seeing any responses. And the second question that I have is whether any members of the board have existing ongoing other interests which are directly pertinent to items which are on the agenda today. No, thank you very much. Might I also ask at this point whether any of the board have any items of any other business that they wish to raise, just so we can adjust the timings if necessary? Thank you. I will ask again at the end, but it's always helpful just to know up front if there's anything coming up. Good. Good. With those introductory formalities aside, I'm going to move on now to the main business of the meeting and turn people's attention first to the minutes of the last business committee meeting, which was held on the 15th of June in Newcastle. And can I ask if any members of the board have any comments, any amendments that they want to propose on the minutes? I take from that people are happy to accept the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting. There were a number of actions arising, and they're listed on the log. And I'd invite comments from anybody on any of those actions. I'd just like to start by saying I'm very pleased to see that work is ongoing relating to the issues in relation to foodborne disease that we touched on at the last meeting. And I very much look forward to hearing the outcomes of some of that work, which I think will be presented to the board next year. I think most of the other actions have actually been completed, but does anybody want to make any comments? No, gosh, you're all very quiet today, but hopefully we'll warm up as we press on with the meeting. And delighted as ever to welcome Emily Miles, our Chief Exec, and really looking forward to Emily's report to the Business Committee, which is always a good summary of the huge amount of work that's been going on in the agency, which we're incredibly grateful to Emily and the whole team for. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody. So you have my written report to the Business Committee in front of you. I wasn't going to say very much by way of introduction. It refers to incidents and gives you an update on a couple of those. We talk about our veterinary resourcing and give the update that the temporary registration arrangements have been extended by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons so that we are able to mitigate the risk of interruptions to service by not having enough vets. And a couple of other things in relation to veterinary resourcing, and the fact that with the arrival of our new Director of Operations and our new Director of People and Resources, so Junior Johnson and Tara Smith, we're just reviewing the costs and benefits of our vet resourcing approach, and we'll be coming back to the board with our reflections on that in due course. There is a reference to the current financial position, which in fact you may want to take in the discussion on the Performance and Resources report, but we are currently forecasting a small overspend for the year, but we anticipate an underspend, and Tara and team have been doing a lot to ensure our forecasting improves. And then a reference to our pay award to staff and the estate and a couple of other matters. But that is before you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And are there any comments that members of the board wish to make on that? Margaret.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Emily. I love your reports, as you know. They give us such a sort of microscope on different parts of our work and show how varied it is. So great report, thank you. On the issue of vets that you just raised, it's great to see that we're doing some really innovative things now, that the temporary registration seems to be working well, and the alien exemption certificates is something that you're looking at as well. I just want to say I really welcome the review, because when it comes to bringing more vets in-house and away from our service delivery partner, what seemed like a good idea 4 or 5 years ago may not necessarily be working as well as we expected now. And I just wondered whether that was why you're carrying out the review, as well as the fact we've got new staff on board. I do think it's probably a good idea to make sure that what we thought would be the outcome of a decision we made that quite a while ago was actually on track.
Thank you, Margaret. Emily, do you want to respond to that now?
Yes, so we made an in-principle decision that we wanted to insource a proportion of vets last, I think it was December, January time. And we wanted to be explicit and transparent with our service delivery partner and with staff about our decision to do that. But of course, it was an in-principle decision, which we then have since done further work to understand the implications of that. And there are things that shift. So obviously the cost of vets is going up because there is a shortage of vets in the country, and it continues to move. And then the implications of how we would do the insourcing, particularly TUPE arrangements and legal advice that we've had, require us just to review, because it's a little bit more complicated than we thought. So given all of that, we want to just go and make sure we've got the most up-to-date view of the costs and the benefits and the best way to approach doing this. I mean, the context here is that the vets, it's hard to get hold of vets in the UK, so we are very likely to need to bring in vets from abroad, and that has implications just in terms of complexity.
Thank you. Emily, if I could just ask, at the last, actually it was at the last board meeting, we talked quite a bit about the Commission on headcount in the civil service. And whilst I understand that no decisions have been made about that, I wonder if you could just tell us how that is impacting on the organisation at the moment.
So we have two separate things. The commission that the civil service, that the Cabinet Office and the Treasury gave the civil service back in about June time, was for us to model headcount reductions of 20, 30 and 40%. And we have done our return to the Treasury and the Cabinet Office with our modelling and have explained what the implications would be for our business, which would be extremely substantial. It would be very problematic. We haven't yet had a response on that commission, and I think inevitably, with the change of Prime Minister, there is further thought going on in the centre about how to approach these questions. In terms of how that commission has itself affected the behaviour or the activity in the FSA, we have continued with our plans this year to deliver the business we had planned this year, which includes a fair amount of recruitment. I mean, other directors may want to comment, but my sense is that although there is some anxiety about whether we are recruiting people who we will be able to sustain in post beyond the next year or two, nevertheless, actually, we are being able to do that recruitment, and we are living up to some of those plans. There is a little bit of I can't think of the word, a sort of dampening is the word, on dampening effect on managers' behaviour, I would say, but it's not yet substantial. I mean, Tara may want to comment further.
Yeah, happy to. I think perhaps there was a month or so of us being a little bit cautious, and that may have slowed us slightly down on some recruitment, but since we kind of put in the return, I must admit, and I think we can touch on it when we talk about the P&R report as well, where we produce some of our metrics around recruitment, which has been quite significant. So we have taken on 215 people in the last 12 months. We have plans to take on many more this year, and those plans are becoming, we've got more and more confidence in our ability to recruit those people as well, as we are linking up our recruitment systems with our financial reporting systems. So while I think there might have been a few weeks of feeling a bit anxious and nervous to think, what should we do in the face of this commission, I think we've quite rightly carried on, keep calm and carry on until we see what actually happens. Obviously, it's quite uncertain at the moment. We're just waiting to hear what the new Prime Minister and her government kind of want to do with all the returns they've received. But we are regularly in touch with our Treasury team to keep it to understand where they are with it.
Thank you, Tara. And as you say, that it does somewhat link into the finance section of the P&R report, where I may as well make the comment now. I was really encouraged to see the success you've had in the recruitment campaigns, particularly at a senior level, with really strong field of candidates, and being able to identify a preferred candidate and reserves. I think is really impressive, and I hope testament to people seeing the FSA as being a good place to work. Okay, I'm not seeing any further comments from
Can I suggest that Margaret takes over?
Gosh, bit of a baptism of fire. Yeah, we've lost Susan, which is a bit of a shame. But we are now moving, because there are no one else wants to say anything. We're now moving on to the next item, which I believe is the, as I quickly get it up on my paper, which is the performance report. Who's going to do the introduction to that?
It's me, Margaret. Hi.
Lovely. Hi, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So just as a brief introduction, this is the first quarterly performance and resources report since the launch of our strategy, and it's the first update for 22-23. So we have taken the opportunity to move to a new style report based on the corporate plan. So we've added a greater emphasis on more forward-looking information, aiming for performance reporting that is data-driven and supports decision-making, and this is evolving as we work through. So I'd like to take the opportunity just to highlight a few areas from the report, which I'm going to take as read. So first of all, on slide 4, you will see that our measures of trust and confidence in the Food Standards Agency and the food system both remain high, while we continue to seek proactive media opportunities. On slide 5, we can see that the overall picture of FBO compliance with food safety, hygiene and animal welfare regulations is stable at the end of Q1, with 98.9% rated good or generally satisfactory. And while there's an 8% shortfall of audits completed in Q1, this is all within the context of a higher volume of both scheduled audits and partial follow-up audits. So then turning to local authority performance, which is on slides 7 to 9, we can see progress against our local authority recovery plan. And there has been a positive improvement in the system following the sharp drop in 2021, which was impacted by COVID. On slide 9, we have provided an update on the performance of the National Food Crime Unit. And it's worth noting that there is a planned deep dive into MFCU with the annual paper coming to the December board. On slide 4, we've touched on this a little bit already. We've presented the key metrics on staff recruitment and attrition. And we should be really delighted that we've had 315 individuals join the Food Standards Agency over the last 12 months. And that aligns with our plans of growth to deliver our new post-Brexit responsibilities. And while attrition is 11.6%, this rate is 2% lower than the civil service average. And then finally, briefly on finances, which starts in slide 15. Emily also noted we're improving the accuracy of forecasting. So we're holding quarterly director meetings. We're continuing to encourage bids of funding to the investment board. And we've got a greater analysis of our committed and uncommitted spend. At Q1, we were forecasting an overspend of 2.7 million of Westminster budgets, which this was in line with our strategy where we started the year with an over-programme position to enable us to push forward as much as possible with the SR21 plans. But based on our historic knowledge of optimism bias in the forecast, we do expect forecasts to fall. So we are still managing that risk of ultimately underspending potentially, but we want to maintain that good financial control and make really great value for money spending decisions. So I'm just going to pause at this point, and the executive team or I are happy to take any other questions on this report.
Great, and hopefully I'm back with you. Apologies for that, and thank you to Margaret for stepping in very seamlessly. So let's open up this paper for discussion. I don't know if you want to take it in some, well, let's see who wants to go first with which topic, and then we'll try to structure it beyond that. I wondered if we wanted to talk about local authority performance in particular, given that we discussed that quite a bit at the last board meeting. Mark.
Thanks, Susan. And yeah, very happy to kick off on local authorities if that's convenient. The number of things to say on this. I think the reduction in the number of businesses that are unrated is both impressive and very welcome. I'd be interested to know whether that's because of an increase in inspections or whether it's a product of the bit of work we did to sort of remove the businesses that don't need inspecting because they've never really kicked off, if you see what I mean, or probably a combination of the two, I suspect. But it's certainly a significant improvement. Another comment in relation to local authority engagement, I would never want us to lose sight of really how important that is to local authorities. It's really helpful, and the FSA is one of the only national regulators who have really clear expectations of what they require from local authorities and who engage with those local authorities to make sure they're delivered. Actually, when you're running a service in a local authority, that is a really helpful position to be in. So that local authority engagement is again very welcome, but as a board I think we really need to understand how important that is to helping our delivery partners actually get the resources to deliver locally. I'd be really interested to know exactly what it means when we escalate someone. I think this is where we've escalated a local authority from 1 to 2, and I'd be interested to know, what that actually means, why we needed to, without going into details of who it is, obviously don't want to know that, but the kind of why we needed to do that and what we hope to achieve with that escalation. I had a couple of other questions about the food crime unit, but that was all on local authority. Susan, I don't know if you want to park the food crime stuff till a bit later.
Yeah, let's just pick up any more. Fiona, was yours about local authorities as well? Let's pick up all the local authority comments and then we'll circle back on that. But you've managed to get the NFCU next on the discussion points, Mark.
Thank you, Susan. It's a point following Mark on engagement with the local authorities. And it's really to find out a little bit more about the engagement with 45. Are we seeing that there's a need for more in-depth work because we're engaging more deeply? And obviously that's a critical part of our work, is to understand where there are challenges and problems on the ground through those teams. So it'd be helpful just to hear a little bit more about that. Is a better relationship unearthing more potential issues that we can be helping to deal with? So that was my main question. Thank you.
Good. And David, did you want to come in on local authorities?
No, I'm National Food.
Okay, all right. Tara, do you want to come back on that, or perhaps even Maria maybe want to pick that up? Maria, I think.
Susan, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see you all, and I'm very sorry you couldn't make it to Belfast. I just want to say, first of all, that we are really pleased with the local authority recovery plan. I think local authorities have really pushed out the boat in terms of the work that they're doing to recover from where we were at the height of the pandemic. And I thanks Mark for your comments around the reduction on the unrated businesses. As you know, the Food Standards Agency provided a bit of funding to local authorities to help them with that triaging process, and that has really helped us to remove businesses from the whole system that maybe never ever started working or worked for a short time and closed down. So that's why we're seeing reductions in numbers there. I just want to make a little bit of a distinction between local authority engagement and performance management. So we have a small team who engage with the local authorities on a regular basis, and they deal with their queries and their concerns in real time. So they attend all of the food liaison groups, and they have a very good relationship with local authorities so that local authorities can get their issues dealt with very quickly. That's the local authority engagement team. Performance management is very different, and that is our way of looking at local authorities and saying, are local authorities achieving our expectations? And through this process of recovery, we have been very clear about what our expectations are. So the numbers, the 45 that were asked about, basically those local authorities were escalated because they triggered an issue for us. So that there was a concern there about potentially, the numbers of premises that they had visited or the number of staff that they had to carry out their recovery work. So we then speak to those local authorities. We look at what the issues are and what the problems are in their area. And what we really want to make sure of is that they have the resources in place to be able to continue on their pathway to recovery. And I'm really pleased to say that most of those issues are resolved very quickly. And that's why those local authorities were de-escalated. There are a couple of local authorities that we continue to have concerns about, and that is mainly because they do not have the staffing resources that they need to carry out the work that we
Have we
want.
lost Susan again?
I hope not.
Ah, maybe with me.
So yes, we have escalated a couple of local authorities to stage 2 of our process, and that is head of service to head of service formal correspondence to make sure that people in the local authorities at that head of service level know exactly what is happening and that they are taking steps to solve the issues.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, that's really helpful, and this is such an important area. Local authorities are such an important delivery partner for us. We cannot keep food safe without their input. If there's no further comments, let's move on from that and on to NFCU. So, Mark, I'm going to let you make the comment I stopped you making earlier, and then I'll go to David.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Wrong button. I'm just interested to know on the document we've got in front of us, there's something about 28 food crime successes. Something a little bit further on talks about, I've just lost the numbers now, 20 disruptions and 8 outcomes. Is that what the 28 are? And what do we mean by outcomes?
Good point.
Thank you. David, let me take your questions and then I will come to the team to respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. I wish I could answer Mark's questions there, but I don't have the detail. All I wanted to say was that there are 11 major investigations underway. They've had some considerable success, not just in getting prosecutions, but getting orders to remove the proceeds of crimes, which criminals fear more than a short term in prison. There are also about a score of others in the development stage, which may lead to major operations depending on the information we receive. However, the main concern must be with the cost of living crisis and with people trying to look for cheaper food. This is a golden opportunity for every criminal and flyboy under the sun to try and get more condemned food back into the food system and to pass off more food. So I think the National Food Crime Unit is aware that we'll be under increasing pressure over the next year or so as criminals seek to exploit the current cost of living crisis. There's nothing more we can do directly about it. It's just a matter of using the limited resources they have to try and fight this growing scourge. I'm just alerting board members that we can anticipate, I think, an increase in the amount of food scams and fake food being passed off.
Thank you, David. Tara, I'm imagining maybe it's Junior, is it, who might want to respond on Mark's points in particular. I think, David, I think your point's well made. I think we know that. I know the NFCU are very conscious of that. And, over the last year or so, of course, we've increased that size of that team from, less than 20 to more than 80. So whilst one can never do enough on prevention, I am confident that we're in a very much better place to deal with this now than we were a few years ago. Junior.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And David, thanks for that endorsement and reflection. I think it's really important that we pick that up and recognise that the current geopolitical challenges that we're facing are probably going to relate and translate into some of the challenges that you've just described. And you'll be aware that we're undergoing a strategic review of the National Food Crime Unit that we'll be bringing back to the board in December. Mark, coming back to your specific question, does the 28 successes translate into the 20 disruptions and 8 outcomes? I'm going to have to come back to you on that specific detail, I'm afraid. So I'll come back and make sure that I respond to that in particular. But what I would say in regards to the 20 disruptions and the outcomes, in the actual slide, you can see the outcomes are going down and the disruptions are actually going up the other way. That is a good thing. Because it's actually harder to meet the threshold of disruptions than it is for the outcomes we try to achieve. So whilst you see that going down, disruptions going up is actually a good thing, and actually that does demonstrate that the focus of the activities of the unit are now starting to actually improve the number of crime being disrupted out there.
Thank you. Margaret.
My question relates to other things. Is that okay, Susan? Right. A couple of things. Ops transformation, you talk about segmentation, which is also always going to be difficult. And I wondered how important the issues mentioned on page 174 of my batch around functionality and outputs of the model, how important those issues are. So whether Junior could tell us about something about that. And then one other thing, which is to do with our overall deliverability and delays amongst some work streams. One of the things mentioned is delays on healthier and more sustainable food, raising questions that we have debated in the past about putting this in our strategic plan and whether we can be able to work on issues that aren't necessarily directly linked to our remit and are perhaps less of a priority with the change of government. It's something we'd like to do, but can we afford now to do that?
Who wants to pick up this questions? Were there any other questions around ops, I suppose? Let's just, or even the meat food business compliance and audits. Is there anything else in that section of that people want to comment? So Junior, why don't I just come to you to address that point, and then perhaps Emily maybe to make a broader comment about resourcing and prioritisation.
Yep. On the segmentation, Margaret, what we've identified is that in the modelling that we use to segment the market, and therefore that determined the frequency of the inspections, what we found is that in the initial approach or the model that was built, we were targeting some businesses probably incorrectly. So what we're now doing is actually rewriting and actually reformatting the actual methodology, and we will then be going out with a revised version. So the stuff that we've already started and the businesses we started to engage with off the back of the original segmentation analysis, we're still continuing to do that, but we've just paused it whilst we address and fix the model.
Thank you. And Emily, do you want to comment on the wider issue, please?
Thank you. Sorry, a slightly sticky mute button there. I should also say, by the way, that I'm here with Diane Barlow, in case you wondered why there were two of us in the room. So on the question of prioritisation, really, which is what I heard behind Margaret's question, we do think that the new Prime Minister and the new government and their work programme is going to have a substantial impact on our thinking about what we do. I was actually planning to raise that in the board meeting on Monday. So if it's okay, I suggest we take that there.
That's fine. Very happy to do that. Judith.
Hi, thanks, Susan. Just wanted to say I'm obviously very new to the FSA, and I felt that the style of the report was excellent and very much aligns with the open and transparency because it's very easy to read. So just want to comment on that. But what really has struck me, as I say, being very new to all of this, was the percentages. They're fantastic. The 92% about food safety and 86% about labelling. That the trust in the FSA was 77%. And I know the Food and You survey goes into that a bit more, and our ambition is 75%. But I just wondered, is that an area that we were focusing on, or is the 75% a reasonable acceptance?
Really, really good point, and that's something that we've noted. Tara, you probably want to comment on that, I expect, the trust in the FSA, or perhaps one for Stephen, maybe.
Yeah, because usually we'd have Julie here as well, so who runs all the surveys as well, Judith. But I was going to maybe suggest, because I think Stephen, we were looking at this in advance of the meeting, and in particular, where we've seen some opportunities for, as we mentioned in the report, the media opportunities. So do you want to take this one, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick it up, Tara, and good afternoon, everybody. And Judith, thank you very much for that and for the observations on the report. I mean, I think first of all, given the seismic shocks and the challenges that have been faced in the food system over the recent period, I'm absolutely delighted that we've managed to sustain and in fact improve over the last period in the Food and You and maintain that really high level of trust from consumers that the organisation enjoys. But that said, we are never complacent about it. We'll not just continue to look for media opportunities. That is really important. And even over the last 24 hours, Emily has been on the Jeremy Vine programme talking about the backlog and inspections. We have Robin doing a feature piece in the Grocer this weekend on best before dates, and hopefully Susan also on Radio 4. So we're continuing to respond to and take the media opportunities that are presented to us to get out there and to present the FSA's position in as positive a light as possible. There are lots of other parts of the organisation working to ensure that that trust is maintained. So all of the relationships that we have with stakeholders, the work that we do in briefing parliamentarians, we'll no doubt have a further discussion about that and the importance of it when we talk about precision breeding and other areas in the board on Monday. But absolutely, we're delighted that we have these high levels of trust compared to other government institutions, but no complacency whatsoever about that. And we continue to chase every opportunity we can to keep the levels of trust at those levels that they stand.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Hayley in a moment, but I mentioned in an earlier comment about being really pleased to see the seeming success of our staff recruitment, but we're very, very conscious that our staff are our most precious resource and can't do anything without them. So it's an area in which we're trying to put particular attention. And to that end, I've asked Hayley, who's one of our new board members, to take a particular sort of interest and oversight in that area. So timely just to ask Hayley to come in at that point.
Thank you, Susan. I was going to announce that I've been asked to take on this as a particular area of responsibility on the board, and so Maria and Tara and other members of the team and I are going to have an initial discussion about this after the board meeting next week, and I think it goes into some of the areas of concern and risk highlighted in the performance report, but I think beyond that there'll be much bigger issues to look at, including the Cabinet Office review and any consequences of that, the people plan, which I know has been sort of slightly put on the back burner, so it hopefully be a positive intervention, even though some of the challenges I'm sure will be difficult. So thank you for asking me to take that on, and look forward to working with the team on it.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. So I think that's probably been a really, really good session actually on that report, and that's perhaps partly because we're all fresh and this is the start of the day. We usually get to business committee late in the day, but I have to say, at least personally, I think it's also because the style of this report is really evolved again. Tara and the team have been putting a lot of effort into trying to present it in a way which makes it easier for us to assimilate the huge amount of information it contains. And I just want to say a huge thank you. I think Tara will say we're still not quite there yet, but the direction of travel is fantastic, really, really helpful. Yeah, great. Lovely. And since we've all had such a good discussion, I had the foresight to plan a short break for us now, so we can just, yes, get away from the screen for a moment, and we will come back again. Let's stick onto the schedule, and oh gosh, we've got a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being so prompt. And we're going to turn our attention now to two papers. Firstly, the risk analysis process, and then on to regulated products. And we're joined for both of these items by Peter Quigley, who is our Deputy Director of Regulatory Services. So just to remind board members, this report is essentially to update the committee on the issues which are going through our risk analysis process, but in particular to report on the development of the performance measures for the process. For the benefit really of the new board members, we've been trying to turn this into something which is very much a service, and which has some very clear expectations so that stakeholders know what they can expect. And I think for us as a board, it's also going to be very helpful for us to be able to monitor and assure ourselves that the process is working as we intended. So this is a work in progress, but very keen to have your comments in particular on the proposals for the performance measures. But I'm perhaps jumping a little bit ahead of myself, and so why don't I just start by handing this over to Peter to introduce the paper and take us through it. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, all. I'll just give a very quick overview of the paper and then welcome comments from business committee members, leave as much time as possible. To support some of what Susan was just saying, so our risk analysis update paper is provided to each committee meeting and provides some information on the status of issues going through our process around risk analysis. And as Susan alluded to, I think it'd be helpful today to focus the discussion on the development of performance reporting measures, which are all set out in section 5 of the paper. And so I should say that these measures are focused on providing the board with assurance that we're delivering on the underpinning principles of our risk analysis approach around openness, the use of science and evidence, for country working, and also bringing in a focus on efficiency in moving issues through the system with potential then target timescales. So I'll stop there and welcome any comments and reflections from business committee members.
Thank you, Peter. One of the well, I think there are two aspects to this. One is, have we got the right measures? And then secondly, we can think about what does success look like? And the latter is harder, I think, because we haven't really got much of a history to draw on to understand what the normal rate of progress is. But let me open it up to members. I think I can I see Margaret was oh no, I wasn't sure if that was a real hand as opposed to a virtual hand, but
I'm certainly happy if no one else
okay.
wants to
Go for
it. Comments. But it wasn't a real hand, no. It does feel like an information paper in a way. It's sort of work in progress. I just wonder, and I really do look forward to a deeper dive in December at the board. I think that'll be great. I just wondered how the FSS contributes to this whole mechanism of working together. I was intrigued by that. And then how, because there'll be some things they'd be interested in that we will find at a risk that they may not. Then on the actual things that you mention in this paper, the bamboo thing, you know, as one who's been drinking out of a bamboo coffee cup, the one that I take when I go on the tube or something for years, you know, how do we get, and we're suddenly putting it up there as a risk. It's the sort of perennial question of are there mechanisms within this way of working to help us try and get ahead of the game? Always very difficult, obviously, but are we doing more to try and get ahead of the game on risks? We often seem behind. And then the other thing is CBD products, we're calling them novel foods here, comes up quite a few times in the paper. Do we have any idea of how many CBD products are still out there? Because there seem to be an awful lot, but that may not be licensed as yet. I'd love you to say none, but.
Peter, do you want to come in certainly on maybe on the first and last of those? And I don't know if Rebecca might want to say more, a little bit more about the bamboo issue and perhaps more generally, rather than the specifics, the more general point of how do we stay ahead of risks. But that was about working with FSS, a bit of an update on CBD. Yeah, Peter.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Margaret, for those questions. Yeah, just on the first point around Food Standards Scotland, yeah, absolutely. What we want to do with the risk analysis process in terms of working through our common frameworks across England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland is ensure that we're working as closely as possible with colleagues in Scotland. Indeed, at working level, we have pretty much continuous dialogue between officials at the Food Standards Agency and FSS, and so often there'll be work kind of driven by teams in either England, Wales, or Northern Ireland, which then will be aligned up with colleagues in Scotland, advising and giving that sort of perhaps unique view if there's a kind of unique circumstance in Scottish industry or kind of environment or elsewhere. So yeah, we have those as kind of systems in place, and then report as officials to the respective boards, obviously to FSA and the FSS board. In terms of CBD, so we don't have a sort of, as it were, kind of total list of every single product on every single shelf in the UK, as it were. So, we have basically for us the clear list of about 12,000 products which are kind of progressing through our system, and a strong piece of advice to anyone who isn't on that list that those products should be removed from the shelves, and the reiteration of that point that these products are progressing towards potential authorization, and the fact that products are on the list is not the same as them being authorized for sale in England and Wales. So yeah, just those are on those two questions, and perhaps Rebecca wanted to comment on the bamboo linked question.
Rebecca, could I just add in another bit in relation to bamboo? As I say, interested in, I think at this point, the more general process rather than trying to make any decision about bamboo, but it might be worth also reminding us all about where the decision making comes and which things come to the board, and how we go to ministers and how we involve the devolved countries. So just a very, very brief reminder of the process. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Yeah, happy to do that, Susan. So perhaps if I could start there. So the risk analysis process is set out in quite some detail, both on our website in the interest of transparency, and also through our own internal guidance. And that includes consideration about how the governance should work, depending on whether issues are considered to be routine or non-routine. That's the language that we've been using. And we have a number of governance forums that essentially escalate, and those non-routine issues, as we've discussed before, may need to come to the board for decision, may need more exec and chief exec oversight, and we have processes through which we brief and inform the EMT, Emily, Susan, and the board, including through discussions like this, actually, so that you have sight of what's on our plate and how we're proposing to take those decisions. So I would say it's an iterative process, and we've previously taken papers to the board that explain how we decide what is a non-routine issue, and in fact we will have covered that in the induction for new board members, and happy to refresh and update board members on that if it would be helpful. So and also just to emphasise, as Peter said, that the way in which we work with the devolved nations is again very much governed by the common frameworks and the ways of working that are set out in our risk analysis process, and we have governance mechanisms that make sure that we fully engage those devolved countries. I can see there's some questions perhaps on this point, Susan. So should we take those before we move on to bamboo?
Yeah, Anthony, is this in relation to this process? Do you want to go, and then I'll come to Robin?
Yes, it is really in relation to the process, which was more a question about the timescale that it actually takes for the issues to work their way through. Obviously, being evidence-based, you are driven by the evidence, but you've mentioned some sorts of prioritization and how things can skip through. But I'm just wondering, what is the process in terms of setting goals to get these done quickly and to reassure the public?
So that very much neatly takes us into the performance measures and how we get those right. But let me just pick up Robin's comment, and then we'll come back and focus on the performance measures. Robin.
Thanks, Susan. I was just going to quickly address in the context of Margaret's question about knowing risks that are coming down the line before they appear. We do have very regular contact with, for example, funders of innovative food processes to try and get an early sight of products before they come before they're long before market, particularly with Innovate and UK and other funders of those things. That has been quite an active area for the last few months. So just to kind of give some reassurance, I hope, to the board that we are also looking at things long before they would reach the process that Rebecca is describing here, to try and be ready so that the science is in place to assess those when they eventually come to us. Thanks.
It's a little bit trickier, of course, when we're playing catch up with identifying a risk with a product that's already a potential risk with a product that's already on the market. Rebecca, so do you want to comment on that, on the bamboo and related issues, and then we'll move on to Anthony's point about performance?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think just building on Robin's point, we have very close relationships with regulators internationally. Generally, globally, people are looking at similar kinds of risks, and risks obviously aren't always unique to one particular country. So we work very closely with others, and we're also part of international networks and international standard setting bodies who are taking into account emerging risks and new evidence. So I think we do have a very good view internationally of what's coming, which is a good way in which we can anticipate risks. Just very briefly on bamboo, which Margaret mentioned. So there are two aspects to this. So there's a regulatory issue. So these products need to be authorised. They are not covered by the current authorisations. But equally, we want to make sure that we're responding proportionately, and that we're giving the right advice to consumers about any risks that there are. So it's important that we get that right. We'll be confirming our position very soon.
So coming on to this issue of performance measures, speed through the system, as Anthony mentioned, this is really paragraphs 5.4, 5.5. Would it be helpful, Rebecca or Peter, if you just said what are we trying, really responding to Anthony, what are we trying to do, and then are we comfortable with these that we've got metrics in at the right stages of the process?
Yes, I'm very happy to come back on that. And so what I'll do is talk a little bit in response to Anthony's question, and perhaps then draw that out into a wider point around that section 5 of the paper. So I think if I understood you correctly, Anthony, the question was very much around this sort of decision making around prioritization and speed and consideration of that sort of thing. I mean, there were a number of things that would inform the order in which we would take different issues through the system, the potential requirements around the pace of that. So to give a couple of examples, it might be linked to legislative requirements. So clearly, business committee members will recall the conversations that we had around Fukushima in recent discussions earlier in the year. And that's an example where there was a requirement in the legislation to review these measures and consider them. So that was kind of what was driving that as a priority. There would be other things potentially to do with kind of any food safety concerns. So if there was something that was clearly more of an immediate issue that needed to essentially be fast tracked through our system, then we can do that and kind of slow other things that are perhaps less of a concern safety wise at that moment in time. just drawing on to sort of the wider point Susan was talking about in terms of these measures, I think what we're trying to do is with this is not straightforward. I think clearly risk analysis issues are quite a range of different things. Some requiring kind of rapid responses, some linked to sort of legislative timeframes, and others not. And so I think what we've tried to do in setting these sorts of things out is to balance the sort of consideration about how we look at the speed and efficiency of the process, holding ourselves to account really in terms of committing to a time frame and being really clear that we want to meet that, and why in any case that we haven't, linked to perhaps deprioritisation for other more important issues, but kind of making sure that we don't use that sort of sense of there being a variety of different speeds for different processes and concerns, making sure that we still kind of continue to track the speed and efficiency of the performance. And I think the other thing is making sure, as referred to in 5.5, that there's nothing kind of concerning in terms of dispute resolution mechanisms being required or anything in that sort of space, and making sure that issues have been dealt with comprehensively and through the appropriate processes and mechanisms. So that's some of the thinking about how we want to develop these measures.
Thank you. Have we had any sort of comments? I mean, now these processes have been running for a little while, sort of under our, our umbrella. Have we had much feedback from stakeholders about the process?
Yes. So I think certainly the risk analysis process with regulated products is a sort of key sort of chunk of what is kind of going through our system. We have a lot of engagement with industry, and we're expanding our sort of stakeholder engagement function to make sure that we've got the right fora in place to listen to stakeholders. And so I think certainly in lots of the sorts of issues that we've been kind of grappling with, so for example, reference to the work on precision breeding, which has been a big focus in recent months. We've done a lot of engagement on that and received good kind of positive feedback about that sort of open engagement, transparency. The fact that these meetings are public and lots of our documentation is public, I think is being received well by industry. Obviously, we're always looking at ways to speed up and to make sure that we engage industry as effectively as possible. But yeah, we've had good feedback in recent months on this.
Thank you. So I note, Peter, you say ongoing development of these performance measures. So I'm kind of keen that at some point we say, okay, these are what they are, and let's hold ourselves to account against them. So just tell me what the development phase looks like, and when we're going to stop talking about development and just monitor.
Absolutely. So what we're looking to do is kind of build up this bank of time. As we've been running these processes for coming up to 2 years now since the start of 2021, certainly with the opening of the regulated product service last year. And so I think as we get into the latter part of this year and early next year, we'll have had that kind of good long period of time to see things through the system. So certainly I would look to bring forward some measures in the same way that we've done in regulated products to the next risk analysis paper update to business committee in December, and kind of have more sort of, if you think the concepts and the underpinnings of this is what we wanted to talk about today, next for the next paper, it'd be more sort of, here are some measures, here are some kind of actual numbers next to them, with the health warning about the complexity, and kind of continue to sort of build from there. But it looks like Rebecca wants to comment on that too.
Yep, Rebecca.
Sorry, actually, I was just going to come back to the stakeholder feedback. So,
okay, let's just wrap this performance bit then up. So, I mean, I think I'm not hearing any pushback from the board at all about the direction of travel here, but I think we do just need to get to some tangible things, make a decision, bank that, monitor. So, are we suggesting that actually there'll be a tangible proposition in December, and then from March we'll start the monitoring? Is that it, or am I jumping one board meeting ahead of myself, and it's going to take a bit longer than that?
Yeah, so certainly I would see it that we want to have sort of turn kind of concepts and principles into kind of cold hard performance indicators in the next board or business committee discussion in December. Make sure that those feel right, feel sensible and proportionate. And then I think, obviously it may possibly make sense to kind of link them into financial year reporting. And so we'd start reporting on figures perhaps in financial year 23-24.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And yes, you picked yourself up, but I was about to do the same for me. I keep saying board when actually I mean business committee. But yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit.
Sorry, Fiona. Was this on the performance measure point? Yes. Why don't you, Fiona, come in first?
Yes, a quick question, Peter, which I think is for the next paper. It would be helpful to have some context as to enable you to demonstrate what you've had to pick up in order to create a new system, and how you then see that as being a viable system going forward, because obviously we're now having to do it as an independent nation, and the system has to be robust enough to stand for all of the users, but also so that in an international context we're seeing as having a very rock solid validation system. So it'd be very helpful if you could just add something about that in. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's something I hear Fiona asking for in the future rather than something we'll pick up right now. Rebecca, I'll leave you just to wrap up those points, and then probably we'll close this item.
Yeah, and just to add on that, Fiona, obviously it is a new system, but it's one that we know very, very well because it's based on the approach that we followed whilst we were a member of the European Union. So that's our starting point. So we have a lot of very experienced staff who understand very well how we deliver it. Obviously, the big challenge is, as you say, now we're doing this independently. I did just want to give a bit more insight into the stakeholder feedback. So I think it falls into different groups, I guess one of the main issues for people, particularly people applying, companies applying to the regulated product service, has been the disjoint between the process going through in the EU and now having to repeat some of that and to reapply to the FSA. And that is just a fact of having left the European Union. And obviously we do have to make sure that we follow our own legally watertight process, and that's meant that there have been some differences in timing, and we do understand why that has been frustrating. Over time that will fall away, because obviously we'll, increasingly we'll be taking applications for the first time to a similar time frame. The other area which we've talked about a lot is when there's a novel product and perhaps an industry sector that's less experienced in the process, and we've seen that with CBD. We've talked about that a lot. That's something we need to anticipate and make sure that we really work with new and innovative sectors to make sure that they understand how best to work with us and we understand how to support them. And I think then the opportunity, some of our stakeholders are very keen to work with us and understand what our continuous improvement programme is, what we're doing to get more efficient, and also longer term opportunities for reform. So that's an area where stakeholders are very interested. And again, as you know, we've talked about this at the board, and we want to continue to work on that, and we know that there are some opportunities.
Great, thank you very much. And I think most of all, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the process is working. Things are coming in at the beginning, they're going through, and we're getting, we're getting them out at the other end. And the pace of that, I think, will pick up over time. So thank you to the team. Really, really good to see this work. Great. So I'm now going to move us on to regulated products, which in a way flows very naturally from talking about the risk assessment process. And we have got a paper which is to some extent a similar update on the current status of the regulated products service. I should remind people that the register of these regulated product applications is available online, and that also includes all the applications that have been validated. And when we say validated, we mean that they're, we've agreed that they're sufficiently comprehensive, properly filled in application, if you like, that's been received and is under active consideration. So these reports to the board are really just periodic updates, but this is very much a sort of live system which is continuously running. Now, I imagine Peter is going to introduce this paper as well, or are you taking it, Rebecca? Is your hand? That's an old hand, I think. But so I'll go to Peter, and it seems like we've got some slides for this presentation as well.
Thank you very much, Susan. And yes, in the interest of time, what I'll do is just boil down to a couple of key points. So I don't think we need to share the slides on the screen at this point in time, because I'll be skipping through just a couple of the headlines, and I trust everyone is familiar with the content and the accompanying detail. As you know, this is a regular update to each committee meeting, and it's a paper that the business committee is asked to note. So as you know, we've tried a new format this time, which I hope committee members have found useful. So it's a shorter set of slides with more of a summary narrative, talking about the flow of applications going through our regulated products application service. And then there's a sort of separate document with more detailed figures set out. So as I say, I'm not going to repeat everything in the slides. I just want to draw out a couple of headlines. So firstly, it's worth noting that CBD accounts for about half of the applications which are pending validation. And just for clarity, that term validation means that the application has been deemed sufficiently comprehensive to progress further through the system. It's not the same, of course, as authorization. And so for these pending validation cases, we're awaiting further information from the applicants in question. Our next batch of potential authorizations are progressing and will include a set of applications relating to genetically modified organisms. And we're looking to launch consultations on these as soon as possible. And we're also developing a new online application system, which will be more informative and user-friendly than our current system. And so we'll reduce some of those administrative tasks. And we're going to be conducting user testing on this next month. So I'm going to stop there and invite any comments on the paper from members of the business committee.
Thank you very much. Peter, you drew attention to the large number of CBD applications, but I was also, I must say, surprised at the high proportion which relate to animal feed. I'm sure if Tim Riley was here, he would be commenting on that, although I know Tim takes a close interest in it anyway. I think David might be perhaps coming in on a similar point, or at least acknowledging that.
Yes, thank you, Susan, I will. First of all, I note the huge number of applications which are not properly thought through or inadequate, about 75% of them. Will our new guidance weed those out so that it must be terribly time wasting for our officials? So will the new guidance ensure that when people make applications in future, they supply all the information we need so they can go on to the next stage? Then second point was on the 45 applications for feed. Now, pardon the expression, but can you give me a flavour possibly of what some of these additions to feed might be? And the third point, that was slide about 5, I think it was. Slide 6 suggests there are 11 or 12 applications for GMOs. Now, pardon my ignorance, but I thought genetically modified organisms were still banned. Government may be looking at gene editing, but why are we looking at applications for genetically modified organisms? That's all.
Thank you. I'm going to let Peter come in directly on the GM one, and then we can,
Thank you very much. So I think just picking up some of those sort of questions, a whole range of different points there. So I think yeah, in no particular order, I think the question around feed, I think one thing it's worth drawing out, and kind of speaks to also what Susan was saying, was to do with the fact that essentially many of the feed additives applications are actually connected to renewals. So in most regimes, the approval that is received is effectively a lifetime authorization. So it's approved once and that's it. In the feed additives space, there is a 10-year renewal cycle. And so that's a considerable part of the reason why feed additives is perhaps overrepresented in the volume of products going through the system, because often it's reapproving products that are already on the market. And just by way of, I mean, obviously there's a whole range of sort of feed additives in the system, and indeed some which we're looking at, which have the potential to have methane reduction advantages in ruminants in cows, essentially. So those are the sorts of things coming through the system. To pick up on GM, and then I'll come back to the question about kind of quality control that you raised first, David. Yes, I think possibly it's probably should be GMFF, perhaps is probably a better acronym for us. So it's the genetically modified food and feed element of the regime of regulated products that we've inherited, that we're working through. So those genetically modified products for food and feed. And then just moving on to that final question about quality control. So we're doing a lot of work linked to our CMS, our content management system, which is designed to weed out those sorts of applications. And so taking really a two-pronged approach. So firstly, the sorts of things that are coming into our system, which aren't really appropriate applications, they are sort of possibly in some cases not even applications at all. It's queries that have come through the system. And so we're developing better IT to make sure that those don't even enter, and no one in my team is spending any time at all looking at them, because the system refuses to accept them. I think then the second thing is just to do with the quality of the applications, where if someone is sincerely making an application and looking to get through the system, and that's where our sort of application guidebooks, which will come out with the content management system, which will kind of demystify and kind of translate some of that kind of more technical guidance, will help kind of make sure that when applicants come forward, there's a higher quality application first time around, which saves us and the applicant a lot of time.
That's also an opportunity for me to say that I've been really pleased that Peter and the team have organised some in-person, well, I think it was on Teams, stakeholder events with, for example, the alternative protein sector, where we know that there's a batch of companies who are beginning to think about making an application and who've got quite a lot in common to really talk them through it. So we are trying to make it easy for business to do the right thing, as our strategy says, to get their applications right first time. It's better for them. It's also better for us. And I think that's important work. I'm going to go to Rebecca. Rebecca, I just want you to clarify, nail this sort of GM issue, because I suspect some people who are listening into this might not quite understand the distinction. So yes, if you can just...
I just want to be crystal clear that GMOs are not banned. We have a thorough authorization process that genetically modified organisms must go through before they're allowed to be used in food or feed. Now that the products that we have that are going on through authorization at the moment these are generally products that are grown overseas. So there will typically be things, cereals, for example, wheat varieties that might have been modified so that they're drought resistant or resistant to pesticides, so that it improves productivity, and are then imported into the EU and the UK and used in animal feed. And they have to be authorised, just as any other novel food would be. And that they're authorised in the normal way. There are no currently genetically modified products used in food at the moment because manufacturers and retailers choose not to. When they're authorised, they are authorised for food and feed uses. And any genetically modified ingredients that are used in foods have to be labelled as such, and that's in the legislation. So they're not banned. We don't currently have any GMOs in food marketed in the UK, but we do authorise them and they are used in animal feed.
And I think probably a helpful point for people to be aware is that is the system which is used in Europe, and we're just continuing. There's been no recent changes in that. Thank you, Rebecca. Peter, you've been waiting patiently. I'll come to you and then I'll turn to Fiona and then I'll go back to the team to wrap up. Thank you. Peter.
I'm interested in what sort of feedback you've had about the current system. I know you're working on new guidance and you've got your workshops and so on going on. From the workshops or from emails or whatever other feedback you've had, what sort of issues are being raised? Is it so diverse that there isn't a pattern, or are there a few kinds of issues which you're going to be able to address either in modifying the system or by improved guidance?
Thanks, Peter. Fiona, do you want to come in next, and then I'll go back to the other Peter to respond?
Thank you, Susan. Yes, it's along the same lines. It's a question around the guidance, and I mean, to what extent, Peter, are we expecting that the team, and I see that you have got more resource allocated to the project, which is very good news. But to what extent do we think we're going to be able to rely on really good guidance online, and an online portal that docks into that for people to use very efficiently, versus advice that we might have to give over the phone, i.e. really well-informed people that can help handhold applicants through a system, which obviously is much more demanding. And then there's a second question, which goes back to the time required to handle an application. We have been talking previously about a stop the clock system, and I think it'd be interesting at some point to be understanding how long applications are taking going as they go through the system, with that, you know, net of stop the clock time, and whether we're meeting those targets.
Okay, Peter, do you want to respond to both of those?
Yes, very happy to. So yes, just going back firstly to the questions from Peter. So I think, as you say, Peter, there's a range of different views, as you'd expect from stakeholders, and at this moment in time, our engagement is more sort of smaller, well, you know, of the realm of sort of 20 to 30 different industry kind of organisations in a room discussing, as Susan mentioned, we did this with the alternative and novel proteins sector. Robin and I had a workshop with them earlier in the year. So I think some of the sorts of, to give you a flavour rather than a sort of, you know, representative sort of sample survey, I think actually we had some kind of good positive feedback on actually the usability of the system, and indeed when we started talking about our new contact management system, one industry contact sort of talks about not losing the usability, or, you know, what we already have at the moment. So I think which was good to hear, but certainly we want to kind of continue to improve that user experience. I think one of the things that did come out, and that's what the new contact management system will look to address, is more of a ability to understand exactly where an application is in the process, and to be able to sort of log in and see how things are going. And so, you know, we'll be developing a more sophisticated IT system that will enable, we'll look to enable companies to do that, rather than, say, emails with members of the team or things like that. So there'll be things in place that will improve that sort of sense of companies being able to track and see where their applications has got to. Moving to Fiona's questions, first in relation to guidance, I think you're absolutely right in that, you know, written guidance isn't going to be the answer to all our kind of challenges, and you know, there's still going to be more we'll need to do. I think the way we'd see it as a kind of, you know, we've got a continuous improvement process in place. We're always looking to get, you know, more efficient, higher quality applications coming through the system, you know, a more streamlined approach. And so I think what we'd look to do is review and see how that written guidance, that sort of more you know, user-friendly material is landing, and what the impact we're seeing in terms of the quality of applications, the number of incomplete applications. And then we'd look to do something, again, looking at the sort of application engagement approach, whereby you know, we look at ways to engage applicants on a kind of quick kind of, you know, 5-minute check on, you know, a specific issue that they didn't quite understand in the guidance, and just kind of have ways that are really efficient and streamlined in terms of how they engage with the officials in the Food Standards Agency. And I think in terms of the point about sort of timescales and targets, so obviously there's some of that sort of the detailed numbers are in some areas in the report, but we do kind of track a lot of that stop the clock information and keeping an eye on where that's sort of longer than usual. And so what we'd be looking to do with this guidance is try and kind of reduce that. But ultimately, I think, as I said in the presentation at the top, that sort of effectively stopping the clock element, a lot of that is linked to these CBD applications, which are sort of in that pending validation stage as we await missing information.
Great, thank you, Peter. I mean, we're a couple of years into this. We've, really, I hope, getting into our stride. It's been tested, stress tested at a very early stage by the CBD process, but I think we're, well on track with that now. And it's, the process we have, I think, seems to be working pretty well. That said, this is clearly an area in which there is potential for reform. We're operating the system as the EU operated it, and there may be some opportunities for us to do it somewhat differently. There are pros and cons of that. Businesses understand this system, but Rebecca, I just wondered if you wanted to just comment briefly. I don't want to get into the detail of your thinking around looking at reform opportunities, but just a quick flavour of what's in your mind.
Yes, of course. And one area where we've already made a commitment to look at how we might do things differently is in the novel foods regime. If some board members will remember that this was part of the Brexit opportunities review that the government conducted some months ago. And we're just doing some work now on getting in some external resource to help us with this and give us a head start. We've talked a little bit about resourcing. We want to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunity to get in some additional help. And that I think will really help us survey the options and think critically about what might work in the longer term in a GB context, and how we can make sure that we remove any unnecessary barriers to innovation. Because going back to our overall objectives as the FSA and our new strategy, we've got a big task ahead, and we want to make sure that we're playing our part in improving the food system and living up to our mission. So we hope to be launching. Obviously, there's a procurement process to go through, but we hope to be launching that within the next few months.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, for a sort of double bill, and we will move on to the next item. So I think for this one, we are being joined by Jenny DeSera and Noel Sykes, I'm sure, is joining us. I can't just see on my screen now. Oh, maybe Maria's covering Noel's. Yes. Okay. So this is a really important report, actually, for us. It's our annual review of a number of issues: freedom of information requests, complaints, internal whistleblowing, and I think it's important to say I really think this is goes to the heart of FSA being an open and transparent organisation. We try to do that in relation to the work that we do externally, but I think it's also important that we're clear about what we're doing internally, and that the work that we do here in reviewing and reflecting on the last year, which is essentially what this annual report's about, I think provides important opportunities for us to learn as an organisation. I should say that ARAC looks at this in detail, and that ARAC has responsibility in its terms of reference for oversight of external complaints and the whistleblowing. So I don't want us to get into the detail of individual cases here. That's not the purpose of this report. But what I do want us to do is reflect on where we are and where there are opportunities for improvement. I notice also that Jenny has highlighted sort of 3 key areas for the future, and I think it would be useful for us just to, check that we're confident that those are the right priorities. So, who am I handing over to here? Is it Maria? Are you going to lead off? Thank you very much.
Susan, thank you very much. And I'm bringing apologies from Noel Sykes today. Noel has allowed me to deputise for him. So, as you say, this paper covers 3 areas, very important areas for the FSA: how we deal with freedom of information requests, how we deal with external complaints, and also how we deal with internal whistleblowing. So for the first part of the paper, we're going to address freedom of information, and I'm going to directly hand over to Jenny, who will take us through that part of the paper.
Hello, and thank you, Maria. Yes, as just said, I'll be speaking to the FOI section of the paper. At the FSA, the Freedom of Information Service has been led by my information governance team since March last year. The team also covers data protection and data governance, so we provide an integrated service ensuring that the Food Standards Agency complies with the relevant legislation. This year, we have continued to maintain a high level of compliance in answering freedom of information and business as usual requests within the legislative timescales. The paper provides a detailed statistical breakdown of the Freedom of Information Service. We've acted on feedback received from previous boards and broken down the categories of the topics of the requests as much as we can to give a greater visibility about what people are asking us. However, reflecting on the point that FOI requests can be about absolutely anything, it is still the case that so far this year, about half of the requests were about one-off topics. I would like to thank everyone in the Food Standards Agency who has worked on FOI requests over the last year, particularly the information owners and business leads. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to maintain our high compliance rate for freedom of information, and the information owners are really critical in making decisions about information in their remit and disclosure. Another point I'd like to emphasise is that over the last year, we have drawn on lessons learned from handling requests to improve our service. And one example is that we're using the technology and the tools available to us much more effectively to collaborate with information owners on gathering data and preparing responses. So in closing, I just want to highlight that we're undertaking in the paper to invest in further ongoing continuous improvement of the service across our operating procedures and supporting the information owners to make decisions on disclosure. I will now hand back to Maria, who will speak to the remainder of the paper.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Just turning now to external complaints. In 2021, we continued to see a reducing number of formal complaints that were made to the FSA. And this is against a backdrop of increased accessibility to our complaints process and more structured and more detailed replies that we give. The committee will see that there is an increased shift towards seeking to achieve a resolution without recourse to formal complaints processes. And that's what we're calling a business as usual response. And that has real advantages both for the FSA, but also for the person who is raising the issue or making the complaint. The emphasis we continue to put on lessons learned, and we will, whenever we talk about whistleblowing, we'll continue to take the opportunity as well to explore opportunities to do lessons learned. In 2021, we also saw ARAC playing its role in presiding over oversight for the complaints and whistleblowing. And it has also commissioned some more work around complex case handling, which continues to be taken forward by the team and by the committee. The PHSO, which is explained in the paper, the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman, will launch a new complaints standard for government departments in October. And it's a privilege for the FSA to be asked to be one of their trailblazers for these new standards over the next year or so. And our role will be to share best practice with other government departments and provide feedback on the new standards. Moving now to internal whistleblowing, the paper provides an insight into the casework in this area, and also the important issue of staff awareness and perception, especially in them having confidence to raise issues within and use our processes. We're making it clear that this should be a continuing priority for the FSA, and we always use the people survey data to help us to inform our thinking in this area. We were a little bit diverted in terms of resources to address the challenges of COVID, but we're really refocusing our efforts, and we have in place a communications plan to make sure that we raise awareness with staff on the importance of coming forward. We think that we continue to measure up well against the standards that the Cabinet Office set for us. We carry out a self-assessment, but the paper obviously points out that we need to do more, and we will be thinking more about how we assure ourselves that there is an effective speak up culture. Susan, I'm handing back to you just to allow us to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. That was a very polished, synchronized performance there. Anthony and then Peter.
Mine is probably as much a comment as it is a question, and it's looking at the points made in paragraph 4.2. I welcome the idea that we do more requests as business as usual rather than FOIs. I think it speeds up the whole process. However, I've found in the past, having done some of these myself, that some of the recipients don't necessarily welcome business as usual responses, particularly the media. They prefer the FOI because it's published rather than business as usual, which isn't published. And I just wondered if you had any feedback from that or any pushback from those people asking the questions.
I'm going to take all the questions. I can see a number of colleagues coming in, and then I'll come back to Maria and Jenny to respond. So Peter next, then Hayley, then Margaret.
I'm looking at paragraph 6.6 and the civil service people survey result, where there's a drop in each of the three questions. We're 3 to 4% lower than in 2020. Now, we've had a significant amount of new recruitment, and I'm wondering to what extent this might be a reflection of people being very new and not, as it were, giving top marks of confidence because they really don't yet know. Is there any data that would differentiate between the newer and the more established employees responding, or have you some evidence that might suggest that the theory I've put forward might have some validity?
Or indeed might not have some validity, Peter.
Or might not.
Let's stay in equipoise here. Hayley.
Thank you. Just in relation to 6.4, so the investigations, whether they were whistleblowing or just internal complaints, it suggests that there were some lessons learned there, and although nothing was upheld, there were some recommendations given to managers to maybe avoid future complaints in this area. I just wondered if there was any more detail on the nature of the recommendations given, whether that was operational and procedural, what kind of learnings have gone out to managers to prevent maybe further complaints in that area. And it may not be something you can answer now. I appreciate. Thank you.
And Margaret?
Yeah, on complaints, very often issues arrive, especially at the higher levels, because procedures haven't been followed adequately. So this is one that, again, which may not elicit an answer, but worth thinking about, is do our senior management understand the procedures and really know what to do, or who to turn to, or the importance of turning to someone rather than trying to deal with something themselves, so that they don't create problems further down the line.
Thank you. So, Maria, perhaps if I ask you to respond to some of those, because quite a lot of them are about our general approach, I guess, to staff training, whether that's about understanding procedures or feeding back learnings from cases and so on. And then the very specific comments from Peter, and then the points about business as usual or FOI. Right.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Yes, Peter, it is important for us to learn from the staff survey. We can cut the staff survey data in different ways. I can't be 100% certain that we have looked at whether or not it is the new starters who are giving us that feedback, but we can certainly look at that. But we do cover off this issue in our induction. We have a very comprehensive induction for new starters, and we make sure that that is covered and that new starters know that there are ways that they can raise issues that do not, make them feel uncomfortable or put them in a position that they're not happy to be put in. And then
Maria, sorry to interrupt. And of course, I mean, Emily and I were at a meeting of the with some of the unions the other day. We made a point about, how much importance we attach to that speaking up. And indeed, there's your Speak Up, and I think that's an annual Speak Up campaign, isn't it? Just to remind board members that happens.
Absolutely. I should have said that, Susan. Thank you. We've just completed our Speak Up campaign. It ran in September, and all managers were taken through the process at team leader meetings. And the HR team did a really good job in just explaining again to the managers what their responsibilities are, and also how they can help people to raise issues as well. And it was also raised on our all staff calls. So we try at every opportunity to make sure that people understand that it is safe to challenge. In terms of the nature of the recommendations, it does generally tend to be procedural issues. And those procedures are very well laid out on our intranet site. So all staff have easy access to our intranet advice and guidance as well. Now, sometimes these things crop up on a very infrequent basis. So the HR teams are there as well. The HR business partners are there to help to provide individual advice and support to people who need that help, either as a manager or as a person who is raising an issue as well. So we have, I think we have done quite a lot, but we're not complacent at all about the need to continue to raise these issues. And Jenny, you might want to pick up on Anthony's question on business as usual responses, please.
Okay, thank you. I think in terms of business as usual responses, I think sort of every case that we get in is assessed on its own merits, and obviously where it's appropriate to respond under the freedom of information legislation, that is what we would do. I think with the business as usual ones, they tend to be for information that's already in the public domain or information that's easily accessible elsewhere, and that's why we, with the requester in mind, we try to make sure that we are able to answer that request as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But as I say, we would, if there was a situation that arose where somebody got something in a business as usual process but wanted it to be in the public domain for whatever reason, we would then obviously take that and look at that and make the right decision based on what the requester wanted.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I guess there's just slight worry is that people might not formally say, well, but they might feel grumpy, and that might have some longer lasting impact. So it's definitely something we should keep our eye on. But I think the point you made, Jenny, about trying to do the business as usual with things which really are already in the public domain, I think that's a helpful a helpful principle, I guess, to have. Thank you. We haven't talked explicitly about the priorities that were set out in the paper, but I think in many ways we have covered them off in our discussion. Nobody is going to object to you trying to simplify and improve the FOI process, so that's obviously a worthwhile thing to do. We've talked a bit about the Speak Up campaign, and I think you will have a sense from the board that we do think that's really important that we hear from our staff, and that will pick up on Peter's point about we need to make sure we get those scores up. And we haven't noted taking part in the new government scheme, but I am very, very pleased that FSA is doing that. I think it's part of us trying to be innovative and progressive and look at these new policies. So I think your other aim of really assessing ourselves against the new government's complaints procedures also a good one. So yes, I'm content with that. I'm seeing a few nods from colleagues. So thank you for all the work over the last year. And I suppose look forward isn't quite the right word to hearing next year, but we look forward to learning more next year. Maybe that's the right way of phrasing it. Great. Thank you very much, Jenny. Do pass on our thanks to Noel, because I know he sort of works very, very hard on this all through the year. Thank you. And thank you to board members for helping me to land this bang on time. We're going to take another short break now for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for the final stretch. So we'll see you again shortly. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody, and this is the final lap for today, and we've just got 2 items, I think, to finish the day with. The first is our annual report on incidents and resilience. And I'm really welcome having the opportunity to talk about this work, because I think the people in the incidents team are some of the sort of unsung heroes of the FSA, because although there's the occasional, big food incident, which we all hear about and we all sort of, their work is exposed to us, in fact, they are doing this day in, day out, 24/7. It's food incidents are no respecter of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 working. So huge thanks to the team for all they do. It's also important because it really goes to the heart, I think, of our role to protect consumers. And the team do this working very much on a 4-nation basis, and that, of course, is very important, but adds its own complexity. So I think it's really good for us to hear about what they've been up to. I should just say before we get started, this report doesn't include any reference to any particular reference to the UK, to the supply shortages caused by the Ukraine invasion of Ukraine, because it sort of feels a little bit late, but this is the report effectively from last year. And so essentially that incident, it started really in the current reporting year. So don't be surprised that doesn't feature. But there's plenty of others to look and talk about, and I'm going to hand over to Junior, I think, who's going to introduce this item, but we're also joined by Darren Whitby, who's head of incidents. In fact, indeed, perhaps it's Darren who's introducing.
So Darren should introduce it. I think you've covered off much of what I would have picked up anyway, Susan. So why don't we just hand over to Darren?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as Susan mentioned, so I'm Darren Whitley, the head of incidents and resilience at the FSA. So the incidents and resilience annual report really outlines our work over the last year across 3 teams in the unit. We work closely with the incidents teams in Northern Ireland and Wales on a 3-nation approach for the FSA. But as Susan mentioned, we also work with FSS on many areas to ensure that wherever possible, there is that 4-nation approach for consumers and industry. So in summarising the paper and picking out some of the key points, I think it's fair to say it's been a challenging year for the team with the pandemic response, winter planning, as Susan mentioned, the Ukraine war, and some major incidents which have really tested our resilience. We've needed at times to prioritise our work, which has meant that progress in some of the areas has been perhaps a bit slower than we would have liked, but I think the paper reflects some positive aspects to our work and our achievements. In the incident space, the data indicates a return to pre-pandemic levels, but we do note that there's an increase in outbreak management and response over the year. So the availability of data from whole genome sequencing and closer working with the UK Health Security Agency is really evolving our approach in this area. And we believe that this will create some opportunities and challenges in how we work in responding to outbreaks of foodborne disease in the future. The paper includes information on how well we've adapted our ways of working following EU exit and developed relationships with industry and other regulators, both nationally and internationally. We've taken positive steps forward in working with industry in the IRU, with examples in the case studies where we are developing our guiding principle of making it easier for business to meet their obligations and do the right things for consumers. The introduction of the RAM function has had a positive impact and recently received a substantial rating in our internal audit on its use, which I think was really encouraging for the team as a new capability. So hopefully the board can be assured by the case studies, which are really reflecting these new approaches to our work and its impact. I think one of the key concerns that's been raised was how are we coping with the change to RASFF access, and has this panned out as we thought? I think the simple answer is yes. Access has changed, but we're still getting informed where an EU detection of risk directly impacts us in the UK. And then when it's the rest of the world, we're being informed through the InfoSam route. Where it doesn't directly affect us, we now use the RAM function and our stakeholder forums to determine where there may be an impact. So really what we're doing is we're just having to work differently, which requires more effort and resource to achieve sort of similar outcomes. But we will keep this under review to ensure that our systems are evolving for the future. So overall, our conclusion is that consumers continue to be protected, and we'd like to ask the board to consider the paper and discuss and endorse as outlined in the paper, please. That's all, thank you.
That's great, thank you, Darren. And I just want to reiterate, I'm really pleased to see the work with UKHSA. I know there's been, you know, some recent incidents that you've been working very closely together on, and I think that, you know, has to be good for public health in general. I think it's also a great opportunity for FSA really to show the, you know, great expertise that the team has in handling these kinds of incidents. I mean, we focus on food, but some of, I think, the work that you do is very relevant to handling, you know, incidents more generally, because we're doing them on food. Well, you're doing them on food day in, day out, week in, week out. You know, we've really built up, you know, a lot of learning. So yeah, delighted to see that. So quick off the mark, Anthony first in, then Mark, then Peter, then Margaret, and I'm going to scoop up all of those comments and then let you respond in totality. Anthony.
Thank you, Susan. Can I just say thank you to Junior and Darren for presenting this paper at the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee meeting. The whole committee was very, very impressed with this paper and the whole direction of travel, particularly the development of the RAM function. They also thought that the use of the case studies in the paper was excellent because it really showed a live context of what was happening, how they were dealing with it, and how they were reacting. So overall, excellent paper, but much more importantly, excellent development in terms of what the team are doing and how they're taking it forward.
Thank you. Great to hear that. And I totally agree with you about the case studies. I mean, okay, these are some of the bigger incidents, but they really do showcase what happens at a sort of smaller scale, literally every week. Mark.
Thanks, Susan. I've got a number of things, if I may, so I'll rattle through them fairly quickly. I too found the case studies really helpful, and they certainly bring the report to life. So certainly welcome that. Thank you. There's a mention in relation to one of the case studies, the ethylene oxide one, around divergence, and I'm quite interested to know your thoughts on what additional risks divergence presents to our ability to handle incidents, particularly as divergence is going to only get greater as time goes on, I suspect. So just that, you know, how we're going to manage the growing risks, or indeed are there no growing risks? you mentioned already, Darren, the RASEF and Infosan thing, which was really helpful. I'm just looking for a little bit of reassurance that the quality of what we get is as good as the quantity, because I think the report talks about numbers. I think you sort of touched on that, but I just want to make sure that we're not losing any quality of information by not having access to some of that stuff that we had access to before. There is a mention in the report about an FSA funded Infosan community website, and I'd be quite interested to know who has access to that. Do some of our delivery partners, local authorities, for example, have access to that community website, particularly if we funded it? And my last point is around, there's comment here about exercising, practicing in effect. There's some really good practice suggested in that paragraph. Certainly some of the learning from the Manchester incident around making sure you don't just exercise, but you learn the lessons from exercising. Otherwise, there's no point doing it. So there's some really good practice suggested in that paragraph, which I just wanted to highlight. And so I'm looking forward to the board engagement with that, which is also referenced in there.
Thank you. Peter, I think, was next, and then Margaret. Apologies, I've done that the wrong way around.
I'm picking up border controls since EU exit, paragraph 4.6, 2 points arising from what is stated here about the considerable rise in the number of poor and insufficient controls. And two things occur to me. The first is the definition here of food safety impacts. Is there any difference over the period concerned of the 3 years? And I'm saying that because there's talk here about assisting in a cross-agency response. And I'm just wondering whether maybe we're on the fringes of a definition where other agencies are actually primarily responsible. And the second question is about how imports transiting through the EU are able to avoid the sanitary and phytosanitary checks. Is there some kind of common answer to that question? Thanks.
And Margaret.
Thank you again, great paper, and clearly doing a great job under challenging circumstances. I wondered whether you felt you were being hindered by lab capacity issues in any way. And also, like Mark, I'm interested in a slightly deeper dive on the RAM versus RASEF situation. You mention in paragraph 7.5 that some incidents you're finding, you're dealing with them, it's taking longer, you're dealing with them more slowly. Is that because it takes longer to get to some of the information from RASEF? And have you noticed a big increase in the divergence, especially when you're handling international incidents?
So before I just turn to Darren to answer that, just for the benefit perhaps of some of my colleagues, but also of people watching, RAM is our receipt and management system, which is used to record incidents, and RASEF is the rapid alert system for food and feed. I'm aware we quickly slip into our jargon, and jolly helpful it is to have acronyms too. Darren, so a number of points there: lab capacity, divergence, RAM and RASEF. Anyway, you've got the list, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. Starting first with the question of divergence, I think divergence already exists anyway as part of incident risk management. So I think the ethylene oxide example is probably typical about how we work through it. I don't think we're expecting it to be any worse. I think it's just a thing that we will keep under review, certainly across the 4 nations and then internationally. But I think, like I say, some of that approach to risk management and how we work through incidents will be done on a case-by-case basis. So I think the team feel confident in that space, but I think it's very much watch how that evolves. And like I said, if we see any notable change in how we currently handle incidents, I think it's something that we'll have to come back and consider how we manage that in the future. On the question of quality information from Infosan and Access, it is a closed network because some of it is sensitive in nature. But I think what we try to do is also be a bit of a conduit in ensuring that we relay that information to the right people as and when needed. So whether local authorities, I think it's just that question of how we work, particularly with local authorities who are obviously responding in a lot of these incidents on our behalf. Quality-wise, I don't think the team have noted a difference in the quality. I think the challenge, and we're talking about that additional resource, the challenge is really around just the way that we access from RASF and then how we use and exchange that information. It's just probably, to use a sort of basic term, it's a bit more clunky than what it used to be. So I don't think from a quality perspective it's any different. The point on board exercise, yeah, I mean, it's something that the team is working through at the moment, and we'll be back with more information a little bit later on into this year. Peter's mentioned on the insufficient controls. I think that was a specific issue at the time where the border controls were changing, and it was, to put it in simplistic terms, it was actually basically a paperwork issue that was being experienced, which created that spike. But what we had to do was handle it in an instant situation. So local authorities were being asked to pick this up and make additional checks. So it wasn't necessarily an ongoing problem. I think it was just a bit of a transition issue, which created incidents at the time, which is now resolved. And lab capacity. I mean, I'll be honest, Margaret, personally, I'll need to go back to the team, but I don't think we have. I'm not aware of any issues in relation to lab capacity in that particular space.
At the board meeting on Monday, we've obviously got a paper about our laboratory capacity, so perhaps that's a point that we might carry over and pick up on there.
Okay.
Great.
That was all the questions, wasn't it? Hopefully I've answered them adequately for you.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you, Darren. And absolutely, you know, I mean, you've heard lots of positive feedback about what you're doing, and please do convey that back to the teams. I think it is impressive that you've been able to adapt to these new ways of working, which, you know, you were good in terms of saying, oh yes, no, they're just as good. But I think the reality is that they are more labour intensive and more resource intensive for us. But you know, you've adapted to that very well. So we look forward to really seeing, you know, how that continues to develop in the sort of, you know, changing world that we live in. But yeah, many thanks for what you do. Was Emily, were you trying to just come in and make a comment on that? I don't know if you were going to say something about, I was going to ask about resourcing actually, and whether we've got enough people on this.
I just wanted to add on the lab capacity question. I think, as Susan says, we can pick it up on Monday, but whilst it may not be getting in the way of the volume and type of incidents that we have at the moment, I would just say if there were to be a significant incident where we needed rapid testing at scale of certain things, I think there would potentially be a capacity issue. So I would just flag that as something that you might want to turn to on Monday when we talk about labs and sampling. And then on resourcing, it's the same comment really. We are able to handle the volume and scale of incidents that we have, which is about 2,000 or so a year, most of which are quite small scale, and then a few very large and significant ones. If there were to be a significant large scale foodborne disease incident, I think we would face some very serious resourcing challenges. We do have a surge capacity that can come in, which we used in COVID, and we used again with the sunflower oil issues this year. So we do have a way of expanding the resilience team on a temporary basis, but I'm always mindful of the fact that we're sort of fit for purpose for the current type of incident, but if it were to change, we would have to reconsider.
Darren, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, it's just in addition to the point that Emily made about that surge capacity, the team are actually currently working through at the moment about where we can source surge capacity and if there's an opportunity for other external sources of of resource in those peak times. So it's something that we're acutely aware of, and it's referenced within the corporate risk register. And so the team are working through that at the moment about trying to find those additional places, because we are very mindful of that, the level of capacity that we have. And like I said, to date we've coped, but like as mentioned, if something significant on a large scale for a prolonged period, it probably pushes the boundaries of our capability and capacity.
It's always a challenge for any organisation with these things of how do you operate efficiently whilst also being able to, respond in a crisis. It's hugely challenging. Great. It sounds like you're all focusing your minds on the case, and as a board, that's all we can ask for. Look forward to sort of hearing next steps. Thank you, Darren. I think we'll close that item and move on to the final substantive item on the agenda today, which again is another annual report. This one is on animal welfare. Animal welfare is an area which all of us as individuals, I know, are very concerned about, but that really reflects wider public opinion. Animal welfare, people want to know that high standards of animal welfare are being upheld. I think it is important just to remind all of us, that myself included, that at the end of the day, food business operators have the responsibility for animal welfare on their premises and during the processing of animals. So we're providing a sort of an assurance process really over the top of that. It's also important to remember that DEFRA have responsibility for quite a lot of the journey for animals, and the FSA's remit really starts, in relation to breaches which occur at the slaughterhouse. But of course, we do also try to act on breaches which we become aware of, which perhaps have occurred during the transport to slaughter or on the farm, by passing information that our vets and our meat hygiene inspectors note and sort of passing that back up the chain. And that's an issue that we've been keen to try to get to work better. So we'll be interested to hear how that's going. I'm going to hand over, I think this time I am going to hand over to Junior to introduce it, but we're also joined for this session by Richard Wynne Davis, who's head of the Operational Transformation Programme, which we referred to earlier in the meeting, and also by Kevin Maher, who's the head of Animal Welfare and Delivery. I'll hand the floor to you, Junior, just to coordinate this as you see fit.
Thanks very much, Susan. And I'll probably just say give a few highlights before handing over to Kevin, and then maybe open up for more general questions. So I think the report that you've got in front of you has seen quite a few positive things in relation to compliance at slaughterhouses have increased something up to a range of 3%, and the on-farm and transport incidents have reduced by a quarter, so that's 26%. So I think we're seeing some really positive changes there. In relation to our collaboration, and when you think about the animal incidents chain, if you like, we're doing a lot more work, and Kevin will highlight some of this, with APA and other agencies who are also responsible for the system, if you like. I think 6 and 6.1, which talks about delivery of planned actions, including providing best practice guidance, improved data transfer between regulators and dedicated cross-agency working. There's a group that's been established. There are numerous things there that the report highlights in terms of improvements in communications and the guidance that have been developed, again, between the various parties in that as well. And the FSA guys have played a real key part in that. And I'd like to also recognise the frontline staff who actually do the monitoring of this on a day-to-day basis. They play a really important role in the animal welfare. Whilst we don't own the policy in the end-to-end, they play a really critical role in making sure that all of that is documented. And actually a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the report is through their work and actions. Kevin, can I just ask you to maybe highlight a few additional things that are picked up in the report?
Thanks, Junior, and good afternoon, everyone. I just think probably similar to the previous paper, we're a little bit possibly behind in where this is scheduled reporting on the previous year, where some things related to animal welfare are current and active, such as the shortage of CO2, which is a carryover from last year, and some of the extreme weather conditions that we've had across the summer of this year that the team have reacted to. But I think you've touched on some of the highlights, particularly in making improvements in compliance levels at slaughterhouse, in transport and on farm, and that's really the work that we've done with local authorities and AFA, establishing new forums to share data, dedicated mailboxes, allowing for feedback on referrals that we put forward, and a more recent system of flagging up repeat offenders, which have improved things for AFA and local authorities. I'll also say that sort of in year, one of the big highlights has been the delivery of the slaughter sector survey, for the first time that was completed for 4 years, and that the success of that and its receipt by DEFRA and Welsh Government was set that up for a biannual report now going forward. And I think some of the other highlights again have been handling of some undercover filming incidents, because as when Susan opened up, animal welfare is in everybody's minds, and it does very quickly become high profile if the media do get hold of some incidents or some reports, and the team do react to that very quickly. But I think that's probably covered most of the highlights, and given the time slot that we've got, I'll open up for any questions or comments on the report.
That's great. Thank you very much. Hayley, quick off the mark there, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you. Sorry, Mark, I beat you to that then. Thank you very much for the paper, really comprehensive and a really good assessment of the issues that the team are dealing with. Just picking up on the supply of CO2 issue, the last time this happened, I was at AHDB, so I was very aware of the challenges in the supply chain that were backing up on farm, particularly in the pig and poultry sector. So I was interested to read about some of the contingency planning work that you've been involved in with DEFRA and other bodies. Some of those mitigation measures, I think, would be difficult to introduce immediately. And given that we know that there's a CO2 shortage again on the horizon, there was a point in the paper that talked about there being a kind of ring fence secured supply, and that slaughterhouses would be prioritised in a future shortage. I just wanted to ask, sort of, how confident are you about that supply, and how quickly that would be sort of fed into the supply chain? Because I know last time there was quite a delay and it got a little bit panicked and backed up. So I suppose how confident are you in that contingency supply sort of kicking in quickly so that we don't end up with welfare? Sorry, that was a very long-winded way of putting my question.
The contingency planning group has continued to meet. It was even such a critical issue that it continued to meet during the recent national mourning period. It's meeting 3 times a week. It's gathering data on food business operator supply levels twice a week. And at the moment, as of this morning, we're not looking at any critical issues across any of the food business operators with their supplies. What they have done since the 2021 issues is looked at alternative supply routes, and there's quite an increased supply now coming from Europe. The priority issues for the industry, we're currently revisiting the priority letter that went out from I think it was from the head of director of field operations last time, but our field operations group are leading on that to look at reissuing that letter of priorities.
Thank you. So Mark next, then on to David and Anthony, and I'll take these 3 questions in a row and then come to the team for comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I had 2 questions. One actually also linked to CO2, not to recover what you've already said, Kevin, but there is mention in the report about exploring alternatives to the use of CO2. So not alternative supplies, but alternative to the use of it at all. I'd be interested to know what kind of progress we're making on that front. My other question relates to, there's several comments in the report about we've improved, we've made improvements too. And then there's a comment which says that major and critical non-compliances in the one area where we are absolutely focused, which is in the slaughterhouse, have gone up 10%. And I'd be really interested to know how we can be sure that the improvements that we think we're making are actually having an impact on animal welfare. because when you take those two things and crash them together, and that's probably not fair, but it looks like we're thinking we're making improvements, but actually we're seeing an increase in non-compliance. So it's just how we make sure that the work that we're doing is having an impact.
Thank you. David, let me.
Thank you, Susan. I believe we need a zero tolerance approach to animal welfare abuses. And I'm looking at the very last slide in Annex 3 and showing the number of animals turning up with broken legs, lame and open wounds. Now, the problem does not seem to be slaughterhouses where the abuses are occurring. It's on farm and in transport and in lairage. Now, admittedly, we are not responsible for those things. We spot it, we feed it into local authorities or AFA or DEFRA, and then it's up to them to take action about it. But it doesn't seem to be happening. So can we consider, not today, but can we consider if there's more we can do to name and shame those people responsible? I remember a vet saying to me at a slaughterhouse, when they saw a lame animal, 9 times out of 10, it was from the same farm or the same lorry company transporting them. And I know it is not our responsibility, but when we've seen it and we've reported it, I think we're under a moral obligation to try and see it through to a proper conclusion.
Thank you, David. We'd agree. Anthony.
If the paper rightly indicates this is England and Wales, it doesn't apply in Northern Ireland because the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, DERA, has responsibility for it in this part of the world. But I just wanted to make sure that there is liaison between DERA and the FSA in terms of just some of the issues that are being highlighted and some of the actions that are being taken. Animal welfare has been a big issue here as well, not so much at the slaughterhouses, but principally at the marts where the animals are coming in, going out, going on to the slaughterhouses. And it's about animals arriving early and then not having to feed and all sorts of issues. And I'm sure you're aware it's become a reasonably big issue in Northern Ireland following a recent legal case. So I just wondered, is that connection there? And are you liaising directly with the Northern Ireland authorities?
Thank you. I mean, you've seen from the number of questions, the interest, and I'm conscious of time, but I'm afraid I'm going to add another one. One of the things that concerned me when I first started looking at this area when I joined the FSA a year ago was the steep rise there'd been in the number of animals who were slaughtered without stunning. Now I see in the report that it's kind of about the same. I mean, it's a bit of a mixed picture, a little bit better for some animals, a little bit worse for others. But we've got this demonstration of life protocol, which I know the team have worked really hard to embed and worked with, religious leaders in the community to have a common protocol. And I suppose I had high hopes for that would allow us to really turn a corner. But I'd just be interested in what more we can do to actually get into a better place on this, because I don't think it is what most consumers will want. So a whole host of questions there. CO2, non-stun slaughter, are we actually doing okay? Links with DERA. Junior, can I just ask you again to just coordinate the sort of responses to this? I'm not quite sure who to throw the questions to.
So I'm probably going to, between Kevin and Richard, maybe ask to pick up some of those first ones, and I'll come back on some of the liaison with Northern Ireland and maybe on some of the questions around why the slaughterhouse increases and what the relationship is with that. So Kevin, Richard, are you okay to pick up the first host of questions?
Yeah, I'm ready to start with those. Yeah, so looking at the alternative to CO2 stunning, that is a matter of the choice for industry. If they do want to change the stunning processes, we are ready, and we're talking to at least one industry body about possible alternatives, and we're ready to visit the sites to look at pilots and trials along with colleagues from DEFRA or Welsh Government, depending on location, and their discussions that are in place. But as yet, the industry have not come to the FSA or DEFRA to actually facilitate or be part of any trial yet. It's just discussions. The improvements that we're identifying albeit that the report shows major and critical non-compliances at slaughterhouse have gone up 10%. And we have looked at this, and it's difficult to make a comparator in year to the previous 2 years because of COVID. However, we do believe that the reintroduction of our welfare assurance team visits after they were stood down because of to reduce footfall at food business premises, that they will have identified and picked up some non-compliances. Additionally, during the period, we've improved our guidance and use of how our frontline staff, our OVs, use the CCTV in premises, how they look at CCTV, how they use it retrospectively, and that will have picked up some more non-compliances. So we're looking at those two reasons all as to why we've picked up and we've gone up. We've got an increase in 10% of non-compliances. On the zero tolerance of welfare issues relating to broken legs as such, yes, probably agree with everything that David said around about the responsibility for this coming from the farms, and it sits with AFRA and with the local authorities, and we're doing what we can in that space with repeat offenders and flagging them up. We've introduced a feedback loop, and at times we are frustrated by making referrals to those local authorities, and we put that into the action plan this year, that we keep having a go at that. We keep poking that, if you like, and I suppose if need be, we're going to have to escalate that within some certain local authorities or the training standards departments of those local authorities if we don't feel as though we're getting the traction that it needs. And the zero tolerance is there. We haven't got for those such conditions that would be graded, you know, as 1 or 2 on the scale that we've got. So we'll keep reporting those. On the DERA responsibility, shall I continue? Junior, did you want to come back in?
No, the only thing I was going to say, which is what you're probably going to about to say, we do a lot of this through FSA Northern Ireland, but continue. Yeah,
we've got good connections with our colleagues in FSA Northern Ireland and DERA, and the action plan, this paper, the reports, the figures that we produce are all shared with them, and again, all of the animal welfare is part of our published open data as well. So we have got the routes into DERA and to the colleagues in Northern Ireland. And I think finally the non-stun slaughter point, yes, there has been a slight reduction, but it has plateaued out from the slaughter sector survey that was completed from 2011 to 2018, where we saw quite a big jump in the amount of animals, particularly sheep, that were subject to non-stun slaughter. There's been a slight reduction and a plateau in reduction really in what the 2022 survey has showed us. So the 4-year gap, there has been a slight reduction. Yes, the demonstration of life protocol has taken an awful lot of work from, and has been a success of the team, but again, it is onto industry to pick it up and use it. So we are promoting it where we can, in the right groups, but it really is something that we do have to stay neutral with. We can't force it on anybody, but so through the right workshops, the right forums, making people aware of it, and hoping that the industry will pick it up and use it as something that they could benefit from by opening up different trade sectors to them by using this protocol.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, maybe if I can just respond to a couple of those things. I absolutely hear what you're saying in relation to, there's only so much that you and your team can do on the non-stun slaughter, and also on this reporting back to local authorities. I assume it would be interesting on the local authorities to see whether they're the same ones we have issues with in other aspects, food hygiene, and if we're escalating in other areas, let's make sure that's joined up. But I also wonder whether there is a role for the board to come in at a slightly higher level. I'm thinking this is going back to the non-stun slaughter with some of the meat bodies, whether that's something that I ought to be raising with them to try and get greater participation. Let's perhaps discuss that outside this meeting, because I think you've heard from the tone of the comments that the board want to help and support what you're doing. Operationally, you're doing a great job, but maybe there's something a bit more strategic at a slightly different level. And again, also picking it up with the new ministers in DEFRA as an important area where we need to have really good joint working. So that's for me a bit of a note to self to talk. Mark, did you want to just come back on some of that? And then I haven't forgotten, I'll come back to Richard and Junior.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Just two quick things, if I can. In terms of local authorities, obviously we have a team who engage with local authorities, and they are engaging with trading standards. So I just wanted to make sure that that's joined up, really, in terms of if we've got an issue in one space with trading standards, we've got teams who are talking to them regularly. No reason why we shouldn't be talking to them about this as well. My other thing was around, my question actually was not around why things might be going, why non-compliance might be going up in slaughterhouses. I think the report sets that. It's about how we assure the impact of the things that we're saying we're improving, how we're actually making sure those improvements are having an impact.
Thank you. Okay, back to Richard and Junior, just to finish off any comments in response to the questions.
Before I bring Richard in, I think, Mark, in response to your final point, in terms of how we get that assurance, so we do have teams of auditors that go in, and where we pick up any things in our audit reports, especially if they're limited or partially audited, we do follow those back up as priority. If we had more time, I would explain to you that's why we've seen a slight dip in the performance report on some of the audited scores that you saw earlier of 82%. Richard, was there anything else that you wanted to pick up specifically in relation to some of that?
Just two very quick things. Thanks, Junior. Mark, that's a great point in terms of joining up on escalation through trading standards. We do see repeat offenders, particularly in the transport sector, and we do highlight those repeat offenders again and again. So I think if there are alternative routes that we can use to escalate to help that, then I think that will be great. So we'll pursue that. The non-stunt slaughter and the demonstration of life, there is some frustration there, I think, from the team, because we've worked very, very hard on this. Uptake is not what we would have wanted, or DEFRA would have wanted. I don't think we're limited in the fact that non-stunt slaughter is legally allowed, but we do want to continue to work with DEFRA and industry to encourage the use of demonstration of life protocol. So Susan, I think we're going to take you up on your offer and maybe have a conversation outside about how we could get some more support with that from board. Thank you.
Junior, are we there? Anything more from you?
Nothing from me, Susan. Hand back to you.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that one of the things I've been rather lax about in this meeting is capturing action points. And with your permission, when we look through the minutes, I might actually pull out some action points. But one of them that we can identify now is, yes, let's take outside this meeting a discussion about how we can accelerate progress on non-stun slaughter. And I know that there'll be other board members who'd be keen to contribute to that conversation. Great discussion. Thank you for all the work that's done on this. I echo the comments that Junior made at the beginning about all the work that goes on the ground, again, day in, day out, people working right through the pandemic, right through, whatever's going on in the world, they keep going to keep food on the table, and to protect animal welfare. It is a hugely challenging job in challenging environments, and I really take my hat off to the people who dedicate their lives to this. We've got people who have a whole career in this industry. Having said that, I should also, I guess, finish on the very positive note that we spent a lot of time talking about the challenges and the difficulties. That's kind of our job, to point to where we can do better. But I think we should also note that overall the level of non-compliance is very low. And if we think of the numbers of animals which are being slaughtered, then actually overall a very, very, very good job is being done. And I think people should be proud of what we do already, but maintain that commitment to improve it even further. Great. That brings us, I think, to the end of that item and essentially to the end of the main business of the meeting. I don't think there are any items of any other business that people wanted to raise. I did, however, just want to scoot back to Rebecca, just to return to some comments we made earlier around genetically modified food. And we just really wanted to be absolutely clear, and a little bit worried there might have been a bit of a miscommunication or misunderstanding. So Rebecca, do you just want to clarify?
Yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity, Susan. Yes, I said earlier, I think that there were no GMO foods on sale in the UK. And in fact, there are a small number of products that, food products that contain GMO ingredients that are on sale, mainly imported. And that includes, for example, a small number of things like American candy type products. And I think at least one brand of cooking oil. And the important thing to note is that, of course, any product on sale in the UK has to go through the appropriate authorization process, and all GMO ingredients will have been appropriately authorized, otherwise they should not be on sale. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to correct that. So it's important that we are absolutely accurate.
And I think in the minutes we'll just put that note up with the main item, just so any who's looking at this later is clear. Great, thank you. That has been a really, really good discussion this afternoon. Thank you to all of the board members for your contributions, in particular to our new board members who've got, I know what it's like, there's a steep learning curve of understanding how this works, but we're already seeing you bringing your sort of, background expertise to bear in the board. We have missed our colleagues, Ruth and Tim, who are normally some of the most probing members of our committee. But I think we've all ensured there's been great scrutiny today. Thank you to the exec for the papers. We've had comments as we've gone along. I think they were very well prepared, very clear, and we really appreciate that. There's a huge amount of work that goes into this. And thank you for your contribution, your comments, your responses. It's been a good afternoon, and how lovely to be able to say that at the end of a Friday afternoon. That's the end of a good afternoon's work. So we will be meeting again very shortly on Monday morning, when we're going to have the main board meeting. I realise I've been calling this the board all day, but this of course was the business committee. So we'll meet, I think it is at, it's probably at 9 o'clock, but certainly will be in the papers. And the next meeting of the FSA Business Committee will take place, I hope, on the 7th of December in London, and that will be, I hope, an opportunity for us all to meet together, as we usually do as part of the main board meeting. So unless there are any absolute final remarks from everybody, I will say thank you very much. Hope everybody is able to have a good and hopefully relaxing weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Thank you.